How often do we quietly carry pressure that teaches us to override ourselves? It certainly doesn't happen overnight or all at once, but little by little, we learn to disconnect from what we are sensing within ourselves. And we do that in order to maintain peace externally. Hello, my friends. Come on in. It's always such a gift to share this time with you. If you've been here before, welcome back. And if this is your first time joining me, I'm especially glad you found your way here. An extra warm welcome to you. I'm Lucy Ann, and here in this space, we intentionally take a pause from the noise and the busyness of our everyday lives, and we come together to have honest conversations about how our faith intersects with our daily lives and what it looks like to live connected with God from the inside out, without pressure, without performance. So if you can, we make it a habit around here to grab our favorite mug of coffee or tea, take a deep breath so that we can settle into today's conversation. I've been reflecting lately on how many women learn to disconnect from themselves over time. This doesn't happen dramatically, and it's definitely not intentional, but it slowly happens through outside pressures, expectations, the desire to be accepted, or simply desiring to keep peace within our relationships. And often, it begins so early in life that we don't even realize it's happening. Perhaps you have noticed this. We find ourselves saying yes externally while something inside of us quietly tightens. We keep silent because we don't want to create tension. And we find ourselves overthinking what to say before we ever say it. Or how about those moments where we constantly evaluate our honesty, our questions, our feelings, because we're thinking about how that might affect everyone else around us. And after a while, that way of living, it takes root in our lives and it begins to feel quite normal. As I was reflecting on this, one memory from childhood immediately came back to me. I remember when I was in grade school, I would ask a lot of questions in class. Even as a young girl, I genuinely wanted clarity. I loved understanding things deeply. Personally, I didn't see this as a problem. However, one of my teachers, she perceived it differently. One night during a parent-teacher conference, my teacher said to my parents, "Lucy Ann asks too many questions." Seriously, why would a teacher even say that? To this day, that makes no sense to me. Nonetheless, it happened. And I remember my parents asking me about this afterwards. The little girl in me said this: if she explained things more clearly, I wouldn't have to ask so many questions. But somewhere in that moment, something quietly shifted within. I became aware that something natural within me, my curiosity, somehow created disruption. And without realizing it, at a very early age, I began evaluating myself through the lens of other people's comfort and expectations. And today, I know I'm not alone. I have discovered that many women quietly learn to do this over time. We begin paying attention to what keeps acceptance intact, what keeps the peace, what avoids tension, and what keeps us from being labeled as difficult or emotional or too much or disruptive. And slowly, we stop listening to ourselves. That's what happened to me. Over time, it became a natural instinct for me to question myself constantly. I would hold these types of thoughts. How would this make someone else feel? What will they think if I say this? Is it the right time to bring this up? What happens if they disagree? And eventually, what happened was this: forecasting reactions and managing worst case scenarios created constant internal torment around even the smallest decisions. If I spoke up honestly and felt resistance, I would usually back down. I would internalize the discomfort and choose whatever restored external peace the fastest. And the difficult part was this: for a long time, I thought this was maturity. I thought it was wisdom. After all, it looked like submission, being loving, being agreeable. But underneath it all, I was slowly disconnecting from myself. What eventually began changing things for me was not becoming more confident overnight. It was this: I was becoming safe enough with God to finally be honest with Him about what I was actually feeling. I began talking to God honestly about the pressure I was holding internally. I talked to Him about the confusion, the injustice I sometimes felt, and the exhaustion of constantly evaluating myself through someone else's perspective. And what surprised me most was this: I realized that God was not threatened by my honesty. He wasn't intimidated by my questions. He didn't withdraw His love when I struggled. And He didn't shame me for what I was feeling internally. Instead, it was His love, His compassion, and the truth of His word that slowly began restoring something within me. And somewhere in that process, I began realizing something that would change me forever. I came to realize that what others misunderstood about me was not necessarily something God wanted me to come into agreement with. Because many of the things about myself that I had learned to override, such as my questions, my discernment, my awareness, my sensitivity, those things, they were not automatically wrong simply because they created tension for someone else. And as we are here today to have an honest conversation, I think this is something important for us to reflect on. How often do we quietly carry pressure that teaches us to override ourselves? Think about that for a moment. It certainly doesn't happen overnight. or all at once. But little by little, we learn to disconnect from what we are sensing within ourselves. And we do that in order to maintain peace externally. And in doing so, we become so focused on being accepted and keeping the status quo that we stop asking ourselves the important questions. Questions like this: what am I actually feeling in this very moment? What am I sensing that God is revealing to me? And what feels true right now to me? And honestly, that disconnection can become exhausting because external peace and internal peace are not always the same thing. The more I've walked with God, the more I've uncovered this valuable truth. God never asked me to abandon myself in order to walk closely with Him. In fact, His presence, that became the very place where I slowly reconnected with the parts of myself that I had learned to silence. Oh, I'm pretty sure I didn't do this perfectly, and it didn't happen instantly, but over time, it happened gently, honestly, and relationally. And maybe that's the part of what living in freedom really looks like. Not becoming someone entirely different, but becoming safe enough with God to stop silencing what He never asked us to silence. So here's a question that I believe is worth sitting with today. Where in your life have you learned to maintain external peace at the expense of internal truth? Don't answer that question with self-judgment, just awareness. And perhaps even more gently, what parts of yourself have you slowly learned to suppress simply because they created tension somewhere else? As I bring this conversation to a close, I think one of the greatest gifts God gives us over time is the safety to become honest with ourselves and with Him. Honest about what we feel, honest about what we're sensing, honest about what creates tension internally, and honest about what no longer feels aligned. And maybe that's where alignment begins again. The moment we realize God is not asking us to override ourselves in order to be loved by Him. Perhaps He's simply inviting us to bring our whole selves honestly into His presence, and then let His truth gently reconnect us to ourselves from the inside out. As I think about it, I wish that I had access to these types of conversations a long time ago. Conversations that weren't rooted in pressure or quick fixes, but rather conversations that we can digest slowly so that we can recognize what God may already be revealing to us. And if you're longing for more conversations like this, you're always welcome to join me here each week. This is where we continue to gather, to slow down the pace of our everyday lives and listen beneath the noise. And we keep learning together what it looks like to live from who we truly are. And sometimes these conversations naturally open the door to deeper levels of freedom, healing, and growth. And if you ever feel led to explore this work more deeply, you'll find a link in the show notes where you can schedule a complimentary discovery call with me. It's there whenever the timing feels right for you. For now, carry this thought with you today. External peace is not always the same thing as internal peace. And always remember this truth: you are chosen, you are loved, you are amazing by design.